It's Thursday, March 6th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast, and it is a hell of a day to talk ball. And join me to do just that is, for the first time in it feels like a very, very long time, is my good pal, my friend, Andy Behrens, repping the Iowa Hawkeyes over there. Andy, what's going on, buddy?
Yeah, my pod suspension is over. I'm glad to be back. It's a new era in Bears football. A lot to talk about. This actually is a hell of a day to talk ball. Not every day is really a hell of a day to talk ball, but this is a hell of a day to talk ball.
I mean, this podcast seems like it has, and we're not even in the season anymore. It feels like I'm doing this podcast like every day of my life at this point. So I gotta pretend it's a hell of a day to talk ball just to simply justify people putting their voice into their ears. I gotta try to no, trust me, folks. It is a hell of a day to talk ball. But you're right, Andy. This is actually a hell of a day to talk ball because we're gonna be doing a big subject here on the show today. We're going to be loosely ranking, maybe tiering the best landing spots, the best, ecosystems from a fantasy perspective, because as you so eloquently put it in our email chain with producer Colin, it's not the spiciest group of free agents available at the skill position spots, especially at running back, considering what we had last offseason. It pales in comparison. So instead of trying to do some, we're going to really match make where's Javonte Williams going to end up or something like that, we're going to try to find the right landing spots so that if a talented player does end up with that team, it's like, okay, let's start putting off the sirens there. We are going to do that on today's show. But before we get to that, we do have a couple of pieces of news to touch on here, including your Chicago Bears, Andy Behrens. We talked about this with Patrick Claybon on the earlier show this week that they traded for Jonah Jackson. They were not done on the interior offensive line. The Bears have traded a 2026 fourth-round pick for all-pro guard Joe Thuney, formerly of the Kansas City Chiefs. Andy, your reaction to this?
Yeah, what a relief, right? Like if we'd spoken 3-4 days ago about my projection for the Bears offensive line, what it was going to look like, how they would address it, because obviously it should almost go without saying the Bears came into this offseason needing not just like an offensive lineman, probably three, right? Like probably three guys who can play immediately. And then you start eliminating from this free agent class the guys who are getting tagged, the guys who are almost certainly going to re-sign. And it's not that great. There's not a lot of options, and that you're sitting there at 10 in the draft, so you don't completely have your pick of offensive line talent. So it was, I appreciate that they got aggressive, that they went out and identified, good players who potentially, great players who were available. It's not ideally you would fix the offensive line by drafting multiple classes, developing them. And, we learn this every year and relearn it every year. You can't always just throw money at an offensive line and expect it to be, a unit that's just playing together on a string, opening week, immediately great. Like there's some team every year where they throw a lot of money at it, they get some names, and we're like, okay, they fixed it. And the first week of the season, they give up 5 sacks and a ton of pressures, and we're like, okay, this actually does take some time. I'm just glad that they've addressed it in a meaningful way already. It kind of opens up that first round pick so that if you don't love the lineman that's sitting there for you, the whole board is available to you. You aren't kind of forced into a single position, and I'm relieved. Not that I didn't think they knew they needed to address the offensive line, but I'm relieved that they did it in a meaningful and pretty obviously impactful way.
Yes, I just knowing that it is an issue, I think that was obvious for basically everybody involved. And this is a pretty creative way to get 2 starting level players. Jonah Jackson, obviously, he's a guy who's played in Ben Johnson's system before. He is an injury risk. He's not like a guarantee to play. I mean, that was kind of why it fell apart with the Rams last year and why he became available for trade after a big contract. But again, that totally makes sense. And the Thuney move, I mean, a 2026 4th round pick, that's like when people send me dynasty trades like, hey, should I trade this, this guy for this guy? And like, oh, they have like a 2026 second round, third round rookie pick where I'm like, oh, who cares? In the future, like whatever. I realize you want to keep your draft picks, and the Bears actually have been pretty bad about keeping their draft picks. They always seem to be, they're not quite New Orleans Saints-ish, Andy, but there's always, you're kind of like, hey, where did this fourth round pick go? Like, where did this third round pick? And they just have like Ryan Poles has had a lot of missing selections because of some trades ups, some veteran trades, things like that. But again, you have to get an answer at the quarterback position with Caleb Williams. So you have to solidify this interior. They're paying, not in draft picks, but a lot of money to these guys. Now they can extend Joe Thuney. That was probably part of the reason why the Chiefs decided to part ways with him. But they're charging about like almost $29 million against the cap right now for Thuney and Jonah Jackson. They're behind in terms of cap number, according to overthecap.com. Montez Sweat, DJ Moore, Jalen Johnson, Tremaine Edmonds. That's it. So like they're paying for these two veteran guys, which is still, you're trying to pay for certainty. And I actually kind of compare it, and this is interesting because I saw Joe Person of The Athletic point out that Ben Johnson was the one who made this comparison, that they're kind of trying to do what the Panthers did last year, where the Panthers just were trying to buy certainty on the interior offensive line. And like Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis weren't, especially Robert Hunt, like when they gave him that $100 million contract, people laughed at that. They're like, Robert Hunt, but he was probably one of the best players on their offense last year, if not the best overall player on their offense last year. You're just trying to buy that like certainty and trying to just plug holes. It's like people say offensive line is a weak link position. Like if you've got four guys that are average to above average and one guy who's unplayable, you have a bad offensive line. But if you just have you have five viable starters, it can be a good unit. I saw this tweet from Theo Ash who said like the Panthers signed Damian Lewis and Robert Hunt last offseason. Their rushing DVOA rose from minus 14.5% to minus 6.2%. Passing DVOA rose from minus 27.3% to minus 4.3%. Like those were big improvements overall toward like they became a competent unit. And I think a lot of that is due to the offensive line. I think that's what the Chicago Bears are hoping for here as well.
Yeah, a couple of points here. One of which you're right to say that you pretty much have to extend Thuney, right? Like that's now becomes a major item to check off. You can't just do this for 1 year. This is about the development of Caleb Williams. Number two, you were racing at least one team in your own division to address interior offensive line, right? Like the Vikings have some of these same needs, and we're probably looking at some of the same players. So you get out ahead of that, and you get some guys that you're comfortable with. I'm a big fan there, and just again the idea that now the entire pool of this whole draft class is available to you instead of having to just be laser focused on O-line, interior O-line at the 10th pick. That's just a huge, it's a relief. It's a luxury that I did not think that they would have necessarily going into this. And so I'm excited about that. I should also say like this doesn't mean that like, okay, we've addressed the offensive line. We know that was a big part of the problem last year. And I know there's also a chorus out there that will say that all those sacks were really Caleb Williams' fault and he's got to get better. And it's not clear that he can get better in that regard. That's a very difficult thing to develop at the NFL level. I regret that I don't have the tweet in front of me and I can't tell you exactly who sent it. I think it was Florio, sent out some numbers on like the number of unblocked sacks that Caleb Williams took last year. Led the league, right? It was like 12 or 13. The number of unblocked pressures that he saw was at the top of the league. I'm pretty sure it was Florio who sent this out. And it's like, that is meaningful information. I'm not saying that all 60 plus sacks weren't, that they weren't Caleb Williams' fault. But man, it was very difficult to watch the Bears and think that many of those pressures had very little to do with Caleb Williams. And, that play would have gotten blown up no matter who was at quarterback.
I've got actually the post here from Michael F. Florio of the NFL Network, not Mike Florio.
Yeah, sorry.
Football Talk. I assumed, by the way, when I went to search that we weren't getting the unblocked pressure stuff from the PFT handle. Right. No disrespect to the PFT handle. It seemed more in the line of Mike Florio.
Not their lane. You're right.
Not their lane. But again, Michael Florio of the NFL Network, great fantasy analyst and great with the stats. Caleb Williams took the most sacks, 68, sacked on pressure, or sacked on 10% of his dropbacks, quarterback pressures, 260, unblocked sacks, 13, and unblocked quarterback pressures, 57. So yeah, I mean, there were definitely offensive line communication errors up front. That is like a staple of the Shane Waldron offense. It was a problem in Seattle. It was a problem in Chicago this year. Last season. So Ben Johnson hopefully going to clean that up here. Just overall, again, getting like competent players, that's really going to help. They do still need a center. Drew Dahlman is available in free agency. Ryan Kelly's available in free agency. Josh Myers from the Green Bay Packers, he's also available in free agency. Like, I'd have to think about exactly how those guys fit from like a system perspective, but we can do that if and when they sign one of those guys. So still certainly one thing that they can go for there. Okay. Good news for the Bears. We're going to try to not crown the Bears offseason winners, every week on this podcast, Andy, but who knows if it'll work out, but so far they're checking all the right boxes in Chicago.
Yeah.
Next piece of news item here that we want to get to, DK Metcalf requests a trade, and the Seahawks are reportedly exploring it. There was some chatter at the combine that this was a possibility, that DK, there was rumors, I believe Corbin Smith was the one who had this. He covers the Seattle Seahawks, that the Packers and the Seahawks were talking about a trade there. They also released Tyler Lockett, by the way. Shout out to an all-time reception perception favorite, Tyler Lockett, but that was an obvious one that was coming there. I wonder if he either retires or follows Pete Carroll to Las Vegas, but winds of change blowing through the Seattle wide receiver corps. Just a couple of reporter notes on this DK trade. Ian Rappaport reports that a DK Metcalf trade market includes the Chargers, the Texans, and the Patriots. Not to put these guys in the same sentence because, there could be some fisticuffs here, but Jordan Schultz also reported earlier this week that the Chargers quietly but aggressively pursued DK Metcalf last offseason, so keep an eye definitely on that landing spot. Diana Rossini of The Athletic reported that the Seahawks are seeking a first and third round pick for DK Metcalf. Good luck for that. That's not going to happen. He apparently wants an extension in the $30 million per year range. Meanwhile, Josina Anderson says there is a team willing to give up, quote, at least a third round pick for DK Metcalf. So, Andy, a lot of things in the air with this DK situation, but we can add his name, I think, officially to the mix of wide receivers who might be on the move this offseason.
Yeah, as a longtime DK propagandist, right? I think he's just clearly the most interesting receiver available this offseason. In terms of where he is in his career, it's like peak of his powers, DK Metcalf, basically, right? The athleticism is all still there. He's in his prime. This isn't, Devontae Adams is great, but he's well north of 30 at this point. It's a there's some really interesting names in the rookie class, but I don't know that there's a game breaker in the rookie class necessarily. There are some good fits for different systems, but I think DK Metcalf is kind of one of one in this receiver class, so that the timing works out really well for him in terms of getting extended at the number he wants. There should be a bidding war. To me, he's the level of player where even if you don't have a screaming need at wide receiver, you should kick the tires on this. Everybody should be interested. So this is like there's a tier of one among the receiver class right now that is available this offseason, and DK is it. And the Packers already clearly had a head start on negotiating a potential deal. That's a great landing spot. Obviously, the Chargers are a great landing spot. The Texans basically have one guy. He's great, but they basically have one guy in the receiving core that worries you right now. The Patriots don't have anybody that worries you right now, so that's interesting. But again, like every team in the league should be interested. Teams that have two good receivers should be interested.
Yeah, I think the DK trade market's a little more complicated, maybe just because I really like DK Metcalf, but I think he's also plateaued as a player, and I think he's probably like a very good starting X receiver, but maybe not a true we build the entire passing game out of him. Seattle's never really built the entire passing game out of him. Now that's fine, and I think that can be true, while what you said can also be true in that he is a one-of-one player on this receiver market this offseason because he is a perimeter receiver that is in the prime of his career. There's not and doesn't currently have an injury question. Because Like Brandon Ayuk might be available this offseason. He is a perimeter receiver in the theoretical prime of his career, but he's coming off of an injury. You look at the available free agent markets. A lot of these guys are slot options, and a lot of the guys that are perimeter options. Like I think if I was to say, okay, who do I want as my perimeter number one receiver for 2025? Like I would take Devontae Adams over DK Metcalf, but DK Metcalf's probably playing football for you a lot longer than Devontae Adams is. Adams, I think, is still very good, but he's on the prime of his career. So he does stand out as a one of one in this particular offseason market, and he makes it very interesting. Like if I'm the Patriots, I couldn't give a shit if I think he's worth $30 million or not. You have almost $130 million in cap space, which is just absolutely unreasonable. It's ridiculous. You can't spend that money in one off season. I would send a second round pick, and I mean they're picking high in the second round. I really do think like a third might get it done for Seattle if they just think they don't want to extend him, and it kind of sounds like the GM doesn't really want to extend him. Maybe even a third or 2/3. I believe they do have 2 third-round picks. Maybe just 2/3 could get it done. I don't know. A third and a fourth could get it done. I would just what do we got to do to get DK on the team and give him $30 million? I think it makes a lot of sense for that particular offense.
It clearly makes sense for the Patriots. I'm also thinking back to a conversation we had about the Chiefs' needs immediately following the Super Bowl, right? Like I don't know that they can get it done necessarily, but if I'm the Chiefs, man, this is just exactly the player that I want to plug into a receiving core that already has some talent, but it doesn't have anybody who looks or functions like DK Metcalf. So I'm super interested if I'm Kansas City as well.
Yeah, and just overall, I think again you're right. A lot of teams should be interested. I think the Packers are interesting because they can send somebody back to the Seattle Seahawks, which might be appealing because otherwise that receiving core looks very, very light without DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Suddenly it's Jackson Smith-Njigba, who I think is a great player, but do we want to have Jackson Smith-Njigba to a giant drop off? I'm not 100% convinced that that's what you want in your receiving room. So if they can send back like a Romeo Doubs to the Seattle Seahawks way, that might make sense for Seattle.
Yeah, so this is kind of a question I was going to have for you. Do you everybody likes JSN? Is he the kind of player that needs to play off someone who has the kind of gravity that DK Metcalf does, right? Is he the kind of receiver where we really feel better about him when the other options go away? I don't know. Like I feel like he functions really well as part of a trio, as part of a, as part of a full receiving room, and maybe this isn't the guy that we can just pump 180 targets to JSN and to the moon and all that. Like they're gonna need some help around him.
Yes, I think you're right about that, and they need help around him in terms of. Is he a number one or whatever? I probably would give you like a better answer after I fully chart out his season, which I haven't done yet. But I think he's a guy that's right on that fringe, ready to take the jump into. I mean, there's very few receivers, Andy, that I want in a receiver room that looks like even if Justin Jefferson in the Seahawks offense with like Jake Bobo as a number 2 receiver, maybe I can get away with that. But like the list of guys that can do that are very, very, very small. So I'm saying that JSN's not that guy. That's not really shade on JSN, but I do believe that he is capable of. He's in the inner circle of players that I think could lead the league in receiving next year. And especially now if these 2 guys are going to be gone, that really makes a lot of sense. But I do like the construction of an offense with like a vertical receiver like DK Metcalf. Especially if you're getting, I think he would have been a really good fit actually as the X receiver in Clint Kubiak's offense with some of the like horizontal like stretches and things like that. You get a guy like that, and then you get JSN working off him. I mean, JSN 4.56 yards per route run against man coverage from week 10 on, led all wide receivers. So I mean, I don't know if that's sustainable, but if a number like that holds, like then yes, he is capable of being a guy like this.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Like I'm talking about him as if that club of receivers where you just don't care who's around them in the receiving core. That's like 5 guys. That's not a lot of guys. And it is definitely not a criticism to say that any particular player isn't in that group of 4 or 5 absolute dominators.
He's a really huge winner, JSN, from all of this, if this gets done. I don't think it's like 100% lock that Metcalf's not on this team. And just by the way, like a great reminder as we head into rookie draft season, when we are talking about landing spots for these guys, stuff can change so quickly, right? When we're talking about surrounding players in the receiver. Because remember, it was, JSN gets drafted and he's behind DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. We might be going into year 3 and neither of those dudes is on the roster for JSN. Yeah. So things change very quickly. And unless you're just approaching dynasty fantasy football like it's a stock market, which some people do, not the way I like to play it, but you can be patient with these players to eventually get that big reward. Last thing I want to hit here. We'll obviously keep tabs on the DK Metcalf thing, but I think Christian Kirk was released. I don't think Christian Kirk, is a huge needle mover at this point in his career, but I think he could be helpful to somebody. Tyler Lockett obviously was released. Like I said, Brandon Ayuk, the rumors are there that they could be open to a trade because they're trying to shed some cash. I don't know, Andy. You heat check me on this just because I'm the receiver guy and I'm focused on this position. If DK is available, if Brandon Ayuk is available, and Chris Godwin, if he gets to the open market, I'm saying a lot of ifs. Devontae Adams is on the open market now. And I look at some of these veteran names, and none of these guys are where they used to be. Stephon Diggs is where he used to be, and he's coming off of an injury. There's risks with literally all of these players, like Diggs and even Cooper Kupp if he's available. There's some risk there. Deebo Samuel was just moved. There's risk there. Even Amari Cooper, obviously there's risk there with the way that he kind of fell off from an injury perspective. But I do think this market for wide receivers in terms of the veterans is a lot more interesting right now. Not okay, I'm going to find my future number one receiver on the veteran free agent market. But you're just looking for helpful players in a receiver room, like the Christian Kirks and the Amari Coopers and the Diggses and these guys. I actually think there's more to this, than maybe met the eye 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, there is. That's a really good point, because maybe a week ago, 2 weeks ago, we would have said, oh man, if they tag T. Higgins, who is there? Is it really so interesting? And now some other names have shaken loose, and they may not be the greatest names. Hollywood Brown is out there as well. But there's plenty of talent. There's plenty of depth to help you round out a receiving room, even if there's not. I think that the clear number ones are Devontae Adams, DK Metcalf. We could have a conversation about Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin, just to remind people, we're 7 games into last season, and Chris Godwin was in a battle to be the overall wide receiver 1. He was having a fantastic year. It's probably best for him to just stick in Tampa Bay. That's probably best in terms of fantasy value. Totally. But a whole lot of the league is gonna be super interested in Godwin. I don't know. We'll talk about it a little bit later. The Texans would be a great landing spot for. There's a lot of great landing spots for Chris Godwin. So there maybe generously there's 3 guys out there who can be something close to a number 1 for your team. But there is a lot of depth. Keenan Allen is out there. A little bit of an up and down season, but he's still a really good pro, and his best games last year were really, really good. So yeah, all of a sudden the receiver class looks okay. It's not the running back class from last year, right, but it's good.
Right, totally, exactly right. It's not going to have individual needle movers. Oh, this guy's going to sign somewhere and suddenly become the next fantasy league winner or whatever. But there's a lot of, I think, helpful players that can boost overall ecosystems in the league drink. And speaking of boosting ecosystems and landing spots, we're going to throw to our first break here. When we come back, we're going to try to rank the best landing spots for some of these available players, starting with the quarterbacks right after this. All right, we're back. Andy, let's get into the quarterbacks. Again, we talked earlier in the week with Patrick Claybon about some of the available passers. We're going to try to rank the best landing spots for some of these players, certainly from a fantasy perspective. So we have 6 on the board. Tell me if you think we're missing any here. We've got the Giants quarterback. We got Raiders quarterback. We got Titans quarterback, Browns quarterback, Steelers quarterback, and Jets quarterback. I think those are the open starting spots right now. Of course, some of these spots are going to be filled by rookies as well. But these are the 6 spots I see that are unsettled right now in the league. Vikings, by the way, I think obviously the Sam Darnold of it all. But if Darnold moves on, they're just going to go to JJ McCarthy. So I didn't include them here.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to look at it. I don't think we I've got a little voice in my head that says maybe the Saints should be a part of this, but they do have their quarterback on the roster right now, and he's probably going to be their quarterback. Derek Carr is probably going to be their quarterback in 2025. They also have to be looking to the future. So I wouldn't be shocked if the Saints are in on the rookie class. I would be a little bit surprised, obviously, if the Saints, bring in some veteran free agent. I don't think that's going to happen. But
yeah.
I think we could roll the Saints in here if we want to bring rookies into the discussion. But this is the group. And I will also say, like, as I was going through the process, getting ready for this podcast and just sort of creating a hierarchy of like, what are the job openings around the league that for fantasy purposes I'm most excited about? I didn't have any quarterback openings in the top 10.
Yeah.
Not because they aren't important, right? Like, we care who's throwing the football to Malik Neighbors, and we care who's throwing the football to Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers and like Garrett Wilson, right? Like there's a lot of interest there. I just don't. When we look at the names that are actually available and those skill sets, both in the rookie class and in the free agent class, and then you look at the available opportunities, I don't see the scenario that yields a top 12 fantasy quarterback, So it's only so interesting. It's going to be a fun game of musical chairs. And would I love to see Jameis Winston get a starting job somewhere? Sure, I would. Are there some interesting spots for some of these rookies? Yes. But I don't see any of these players immediately becoming fantasy relevant outside of Superflex leagues.
I think I can't believe I keep saying this name because I'm not one of the big, like, in the bag for Justin Fields guys, but I do think obviously in the right situation, he could become, I think, both of a really good fantasy starter and someone who, like, okay, we're starting Justin Fields and we feel all right about it from an NFL perspective. I just don't know where that spot is. Maybe okay. Well, number one, I think he's probably going back to the Steelers. I think we can say he's. If I had to guess right now, he's going to go back to the Steelers. But my God, like, that's not a great situation from a fantasy perspective. We just saw it last year. I mean, there were moments for Fields, but unless they grab one of these needle moving receivers, which is totally possible, and they keep George Pickens, and George Pickens, is like on board with the program, then I think maybe that could be a spot, but. I don't know if he went to the Raiders, Chip Kelly's offense, they're running the ball a lot and he's got two interesting guys to throw to. Maybe they add another along the way. I could see Fields being a fantasy starter in single quarterback leagues. Darnold, I don't know. I mean, Darnold and Aaron Rodgers are guys that probably, Aaron Rodgers certainly would not be like a fantasy starter, but those are guys that I think could be useful in the right spots.
Yeah, I'll grant you Justin Fields, right? Because he's the one name from the entire group, the rookies included, who might realistically run for 800, 900, 1,000 yards next year, and it's really hard not to be a top 10 fantasy quarterback if you can do that. So I'll give you that one. But the flip side is what does it do to the receiving core? How do we feel about the receivers if Justin Fields lands with your team? I don't know. It'd be kind of interesting to. In my head, I've already put Shedeur Sanders on the Raiders for better or worse. I don't know. I know how Jason Fitz feels about that, but like it's already happened in my head. So
what does Fitz feel about that? I mean, where's his?
Yeah, Fitz is not for that.
Okay.
I've had the sense for months that Fitz is not for that, and he's kind of dreading it. But I'm a little bit interested in Shedeur Sanders. I think that can go well. But like, I actually think, I don't know, we don't need to have a long conversation about the rookie class, but if we're just talking about somebody who can play like quick game, and we want to throw a bunch of wide receiver screens and we bunch of slants, and we just want to be on time and on target, like that guy's pretty good.
That sounds like Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers, by the way. Like, I just saying,
right? That seems like a good system fit to me. And Chip Kelly is also he's not like the Chip Kelly necessarily of 10 years ago. He's not the Chip Kelly that you might have grown accustomed to in like 2014, 2015, right? Like last year's Ohio State offense wasn't like that. They didn't run 90 plays a game. They weren't, he's different. He's different. I think Sanders could function there. But you're right. If Justin Fields lands in a place like that with a competent receiving core and like grown up coaching, I think it could look good from a fantasy perspective. But he's sort of the one name that has that path, that unique dual threat path to fantasy value in this class.
All right, so from a landing spot perspective, again, we know the names out there. It's Sam Darnold, it's Aaron Rodgers, it's Justin Fields, Russell Wilson, Daniel Jones. I'm weirdly talking myself into Mac Jones being interesting. In terms of the quarterback reclamation project stuff, I don't think he's ever going to get you like a great ceiling, but I think it's possible he could, have a decent little run as a quarterback competition type guy. Very different than like Anthony Richardson, right? The Colts are not on our list here, but it does sound like they want to add competition. Mac Jones could maybe be something like, all right, Richardson's not working out. Let's throw Mac Jones out there and see if he can pump passes to Pittman and Downs and these type of guys. But like, it's Mariota, it's Jameis Winston, these guys. From a landing spot perspective, we were trying to put these in order of like, okay, this is good from a fantasy landing spot. Who does one spot stand out to you above the rest?
Yeah, the other thing to mention is the teams that have the most interesting receiving cores here. Like these are teams that have work to do on the offensive line as well. So there's not any spot here where like you just look at it and it's like, oh man, this is a turnkey operation. We just need to insert a quarterback and let's go. It's not quite like that. But I think
the Jets are kind of close to that. They've got some.
It's probably the best offensive line from this group. Yeah,
weirdly, right? I mean, because they have AVT, they have Olu Fashanu, who they drafted last season, and like those guys aren't clear cut. Like, I mean, AVT's got injury problems, and Fashanu, is just kind of starting to get his feet wet late last season. But there's a pretty decent situation there. And you got you're as you always say, you're the guy that gets to throw to Garrett Wilson. The problem is like it's a blank slate elsewhere, and I don't know that they're obviously not bringing in Darnold. There's been some Fields talk with the Jets, but they're actually the one that I could see of all of these: Giants, Raiders, Titans, Browns, Steelers, just kind of punting on quarterback this season.
Right. I think if we're gonna tier these, I would have to put the Giants and Raiders certainly in the top tier. Again, questions on the offensive line, but one of these teams has Malik Neighbors and some good supporting cast members, and the other is Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers, and those are just great situations. Like those are receiving cores where you are not doing your job if you can't get to 3,800 passing yards with the receiving rooms that those teams will have.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. And the Raiders especially, you add one or two running backs here, you add another wide receiver somewhere that can kind of stretch the field. I think that offense isn't quite turnkey, but like the offensive line is good and you have Bowers and Myers. So I think they actually might be my number one spot. And then the Giants are there. There's just so much like, oh, it's the Giants, and there's like the air of desperation around it. So I do like that as our first tier here. From a tier 2 perspective, I'll kind of cape up for the Browns here. Not a perfect situation, and I think they're going to kind of end up going with like Kirk Cousins, which isn't exactly very exciting. But like there are some linemen up there that I mean they have holes. Don't get me wrong, but like they do have some talent on the offensive line. Joe Patonio is coming back. And you look at like they've got Jerry Jeudy coming off a nice year. David Njoku is a good tight end, and Cedric Tillman, I think can be like a starting receiver. There's just the concussion issues, and they're very light after that. So I do think from a tier 2 perspective, Cleveland stands out to me.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. I think I don't hate the Titans situation. I don't hate the Steelers situation. It just seems like, you can't talk about the Steelers open quarterback position without also thinking about, the Steelers probably got to add a running back. They probably got to add a complementary receiver, right? It's unfinished. So the Steelers could end up looking really good by the end of this process.
Yeah, I would say in the second tier, I'd probably rank it Cleveland. I'd rank it Steelers, and then I guess Titans too. Titans are tough, man, just because they have one receiver and nobody else. And they have some interesting offensive linemen, but then big holes elsewhere. Again, they're just a team that needs a lot of help. I think they might be They might be the Darnold team. They might be the Cam Ward team. My guess is it's either one of those two. So, that's it's. I'm with you. I don't hate the Titans landing spot, but in terms of is somebody going to be a needle mover in fantasy if they land there, I think they're probably last on the list. Okay, let's move to running backs here. There's a lot of interesting running back spots. These are the ones we've come up with. Steelers running back, because Najee Harris is a free agent. Now Jalen Warren's still there, but regardless, Steelers running back, Broncos running back, Cowboys, Chargers, Commanders, I think are worth throwing in here.
Yep.
The Bears, Vikings, and Raiders. I'll just go right into it, Andy. I think the Raiders are number one with a bullet in terms of Raiders and Broncos are number one with a bullet in terms of the tier one here.
I think you're sleeping on the Chargers.
Okay.
And there's been I feel like there's a general sense, at least in the analyst community, that maybe they just run it back with J.K. Dobbins. Maybe they do. I don't know. That's certainly a possibility. If they do, then we kind of know what this looks like, right? But like, I don't know. What if we gave all those J.K. Dobbins gap runs to Amari and Hampton, and let's see what happens under Harbaugh and Greg Roman. Like that is a really appealing scenario to me. And this is a great rookie class. We think it's a great and deep rookie class. And there are some names that I feel like we could plug into in Los Angeles. And like they probably need another receiver as well. They're going to be in on tight end. They're going to be in on a running back, presumably. But like in my mind, if the right rookie running back lands with the Chargers, there's a chance that is actually the best opening.
The Chargers are like the king of the if zone, you know?
Yeah.
But if the Chargers add a Devontae Adams, they add an interior offensive lineman in free agency, and then they add a round one running back, that's pretty sick. Okay, that is a pretty sick. I mean, shoot, even they could go tight end. And I doubt a Jim Harbaugh led team is going to go skill position players in round one and round two, but just stick with me for a second here. They could add like a Colson Loveland in round one and then like a damn running back in round two. And that would also be very, very spicy. Like Quinshon Judkins, that seems like a Jim Harbaugh back, you know? So I kind of agree with you. I think that maybe that's number one. I just think that J.K. Dobbins is probably back with this team. And he's like, if I'm just setting Raiders backs, Broncos backs, Chargers back, and I'm assuming Dobbins is back on the Chargers. He's probably the most capable like blocker of I mean like blocking a rookie in terms of the guys on this list.
Yeah, we could also get the scenario where Dobbins returns to the Chargers, and they also draft a running back that we really like, and then it's just a huge complicating factor for both players, right? And we're down on both of them. I think you're right to certainly call out the Raiders. You know, maybe Chip Kelly just takes his pick of the two Ohio State backs and leaves the other one for the rest of the league. Denver, clearly a team with a great offensive line. Maybe it's a better pass blocking offensive line than run blocking offensive line. Whatever. It's a good offensive line that got no production out of the running game last year, and it's a fun offense. Head coach with a history of delivering great fantasy running backs. So Denver is pretty ready made. So if we want to just call Denver the best landing spot for any potential free agent running back, I don't really have a problem with that.
Well, that's why we're tiering. The ranks. Remember, I always say ranks within the tiers. You want to quibble with them? Don't care. All right, don't care. That's what tiers are for, baby. They're excuse makers. But I think I think tier one is like the AFC West. Plus, if I'm going to throw one other one in there, I think the Vikings deserve to be considered here as well. Aaron Jones is a free agent. Ty Chandler is like the only guy on the roster because Cam Akers, your boy, Cam Akers is also a free agent. And shoot, like, if JJ McCarthy is ready to rock and all those,
let's just clarify that was an ironic my boy.
No. Cam Akers is Andy Behrens' guy. Nobody rostered, unrostered, and re-rostered a player more than Andy Behrens and Cam Akers last year. You were two just like star-crossed lovers that kept finding their way back to each other through different little eras of your life. So he is certainly your boy, Cam Akers. Again, free agent. So maybe he goes to the Bears, and you can I'll get you Akers jersey for your birthday. Your 75th birthday. Anyways,
I'm sick.
That was so mean. I'm so sorry. All of that was really mean to you, but I do mean it. So yeah, no, again, Vikings running back is a pretty sick landing spot from a fantasy perspective. Like JJ McCarthy, if he's ready to go, they do have some work to do on the interior offensive line. They pointed that out right after the playoff loss. I think the Vikings there, you could see even a day 2 guy just moonwalk right into a starting job.
I just want to, again, as I'm staring at our show doc here and I'm looking at these teams, like I also want to make an argument that the Commanders running back could be in this first tier. Because again, great rookie class. I was reading through that the latest Tyson McDonald mock draft, and they put Hampton on the Commanders, and I freaking love that. I absolutely love that because it's, we know they had a deep running back room last year and everyone was just kind of fine, but it's not like Brian Robinson isn't at the level where we could just say, hey, you're competing for snaps. Sorry. We drafted a guy, we think he's pretty great, and now you're competing for snaps. It's not, they don't have a star there. And man, a backfield with Jane Daniels and Hampton, let's go. That's pretty awesome. I know I seem unusually focused on Hampton. I'm not. It could be any number of players.
I love Hampton. I know you don't listen to the podcast, Andy, but I'm very excited about Hampton. And we had Nate and Charles on to do Mock Draft Monday, and they Charles put Amari and Hampton with the Commanders. And I'm with you that I think it's really exciting, but I think it's probably really exciting in 2026. I do think from a 2025 perspective, like Brian Robinson's, maybe not a great starter, but he's good enough that he's going to get snaps. And like Austin Eckler is going to take third down and pass catching work. So like that running back might be a year 1 fantasy quote loser, but he would be obviously in the long run a pretty big winner. So I think that makes them squarely a tier 2 team, just because, again, if I'm stacking up like all of these other guys that are currently on roster, like we don't have to think like, oh, theoretically the Chargers bring back J.K. Dobbins. Like, no, Robinson and Eckler are currently on the team.
Yeah, no, that's fair. They're just, for me, they're a team that maybe belongs, I don't know, between tiers. They're not quite tier 1, but they might be alone in tier 2.
I'm fair. I'm fine with that. But let's talk about the Cowboys here. Do you think they make sense as like a tier? I think they're kind of a tier 1.5 maybe type team, just because they could bring back Rico Dowdle, and I think Dowdle is maybe even better than Brian Robinson as a guy that would clearly stiff arm a rookie. But so I think Washington, Dallas, try to group those two for me.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And different scenarios, right? Because Washington already has this sort of cluttered, crowded running back room, and in Dallas, it's just absolutely wide open. It's wide open for a rookie. It's wide open for a vet who comes in here for the purposes of this podcast. Knowing that producer Colin is lighting up the chat every week, every show. Yeah. Man, wouldn't you love to see somebody like Najee Harris land in Dallas? Somebody somewhat disgusting, just for podcast purposes, not for real life purposes. But I'd kind of like that, just to help us get through the off season. I would love that, purely
for the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast, for literally nobody else other than Najee Harris. Congrats to Najee for cashing in on a big 5-year, $80 million deal with the Dallas Cowboys. Oh, Jerry Jones and the boys heard you. We don't spend money in free agency, huh? How about 80 million 5 years to Najee Harris? I don't even know like what the APY on that and where that would put him, but I'm just making up numbers here. I love it. Yeah, purely for the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast and Najee Harris's wallet. That is a great signing. Let's put that in the books right now. Let's get that done. I see 15 messages and 16 now in the chat. I'm not clicking on that. I'm not reading any of that. I don't want to know what's going on in there other than I'm happy about it, whatever it is.
It's better to just watch the number go up in
that's
the
my
chat
favorite.
Messages, right? That's its own message.
Yeah, we're still stuck at 16. So come on, Colin, put in some work over there. All right. I love this call. That's great, but I think Washington, Dallas kind of alone on tier 2 here.
Yeah.
Because we've got like with the Rico Dowdle thing in particular, he's a guy, by the way, he signs with any of these teams. Like he signs with the Raiders or something. He signs with the Vikings. I mean, he would be a big winner there. So for tier 3, I think we throw, that's kind of like our Bears zone here. Bears would be to me, Andy, they need like if they get like an Ashton Genty, like, yeah, I mean, we're pretty excited about it. But if they add somebody in like the Aaron Jones zone or something like that, I'm just throwing out a name. I'm not really excited about him or DeAndre Swift at that point.
Yeah, it's funny. The Bears could reasonably do nothing at running back, right? They could draft somebody with like, I don't know, a final day draft pick and it doesn't mean anything, or they could draft Ashton Genty at 10, or they could go out and sign Aaron Jones. Like, all of those things are, especially now that they've taken some steps to address the O-line, and that's not an obvious first round pick for them. You know, they have met with Ashton Genty. Genty himself was kind of gassing up the Bears, like in when making the rounds at the Super Bowl. So like, I don't know, there's clearly some interest there. That could happen, and it would be super interesting, and it would nudge every other Chicago running back out of the way. But that's probably the one scenario where that would actually happen. I do think, you know, you threw out the name Aaron Jones. It's a possibility. I think Aaron Jones needs to land in a spot where he's not, you know, we're not relying on Aaron Jones to take 20 touches for 17 weeks. He probably needs to be a committee member. You know, he deserves to be the lead member of a committee, but I think that's the best use of him at this point. He's still really good when he's healthy. His best games are still great. If you're the Bears, you wouldn't have to face him anymore, and he's killed you over the years, so that's fun. So it's a possibility, but again, the Bears could also do nothing.
Lions were fifth in terms of zone runs last year, according to Fantasy Points data, like percentage of their overall runs. Aaron Jones, great fit there. He would be awesome kind of in that zone run circumstance. They were awesome, 5.4 yards per carry on zone runs. I'd also throw the Steelers out as a landing spot for him. Again, I think they're a tier 3 team just because they're a tier 3 team just because Jaylen Warren's going to play whatever. I think that actually would be like a nice committee. The Steelers were second behind only the Falcons. 71.1% of their runs were zone runs, which according to Fantasy Points data led the league by a lot. The Steelers were second at just under 60%. And again, I think Aaron Jones would fit really well with that and be the type of back that Najee Harris, decent player. He's going to double back to his contract, 80 years, 80 years, my God, 80 million over 5 years. That's 16 million a year. That would put him between Christian McCaffrey and Jonathan Taylor at APY at running back. That sounds about right for future Dallas Cowboys running back Najee Harris. But Jones would obviously give the Steelers a little more oomph and juice in the run game. I kind of like that fit.
That's, as soon as you said it, let's make that happen. I really like that. I really like that tandem. Warren and Jones would be great. You know, Jones is also one of the rare running backs, one of the only guys who is available this offseason. Who, like, that guy can run a route. Like that guy, you know, that we're talking more than just, you know, screen game. We're like, that is a dangerous player who can get downfield in any number of ways. And I love the idea of an Aaron Jones Warren tandem. That's perfect, actually.
Do we want to throw the Chiefs in here briefly? They weren't on the list.
Yeah, maybe.
They probably should be, because Kareem Hunt's a free agent. They could just bring him back, but like I kind of doubt that happens. I'd maybe throw them into tier 3 just because Pacheco's still there, but the right back I think could usurp Pacheco.
Yeah, it's another team that might not do anything in particular other than draft somebody really late. And obviously they had some success with Pacheco doing that, but we certainly did not see, you know, the 2023 version of Isaiah Pacheco last year after the injury, and so that means it's an open question as to exactly what is he going to look like coming into this year. I certainly don't have the level of confidence in him coming into 2025 that I did going into 2024. So he is under threat this offseason. I will say that, especially with a great rookie class coming in and some reliable veteran names in this free agent class. They could absolutely add someone, and it would really mess up Pacheco's situation. And that guy could get interesting.
All right, let's throw it a break. When we come back, well, I guess we maybe can check on these 18 messages now that we've got in the chat, but probably not. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk through pass catching landing spots right after this. All right, we're back. Let's get into my wheelhouse here. Let's talk about pass catchers. Okay. we've actually got a lot of teams here, so I don't really know how we're going to tier this out. And a lot of it is very nebulous. So maybe we're just going to throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. I've got Packers wide receiver 1, Cowboys wide receiver 2, Patriots wide receiver 1, Texans wide receiver 2, Chargers wide receiver 2, Chiefs TBD wide receiver. That was good work by you on that one. Bills TBD wide receiver. I think they also kind of fit in the same group there. I said Cardinals wide receiver 2, Rams wide receiver 2, I think need to be involved here. Steelers wide receiver 2, I put maybe because I do think Pickens is a trade candidate. So it could be Steelers wide receiver 1. Then for the teams, I think that are like kind of nebulous here a little bit, Broncos pass catcher, Panthers pass catcher, Jets TBD pass catcher, because I think they could add a receiver. They could also add a tight end. I guess Sean Payton could add a joker, as he calls it. So this is going to be really difficult to tier, Andy, but does one particular sort of landing spot here scream to you, okay, yeah, this one would be a big fantasy winner?
It's also just really interesting the number of teams that have a pretty clear number one, right? Like they've solved the most difficult problem. The Rams have Puka, the Cowboys have CeeDee Lamb. We go up and down this list. McConkey with the Chargers, Nico Collins with the Texans, right? But there's no supporting cast, and some of those guys can function. I'd put Nico in the club of 4 or 5 guys who are going to be just fine no matter who is playing on the other side. But there's not a lot of receivers like that. CeeDee Lamb is one of those guys. But there's a number of teams that need that second option. If I'm just identifying my favorite spots where I think somebody can just step right in and be an immediate impact star, man, if the right guy lands in Green Bay, and I don't know that they're gonna pull off a DK Metcalf trade, but like if Devontae reunites there, if DK Metcalf lands in Green Bay, and we've talked about this at several points, they have such a deep receiving core, and it's not clear that they have that one guy that is just the focal point who can just go snatch it under any circumstances. Do work downfield, do a little bit of everything. I don't know that they have that guy. I love the idea of either Devontae or DK Metcalf and Jaden Reed playing off of them, and that's a great receiving core. So I think Green Bay is one of those spots. I think that I hate to just hype every opening that is even a possibility on the Chargers this much, but man, the Chargers have an opportunity here. I don't know that we need to see too many more games in which Quentin Johnston sees double-digit targets. And if we can give some of that work to Devontae Adams, who apparently wants to go to the West Coast, if we can give, if that's a landing spot for DK, that is an incredible spot. And I think that would really be good. The Patriots are funny because we've listed Patriots wide receiver 1. We could have made this Patriots wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. Like they can just go out and sign a whole new receiving core and reshuffle things. So I think that is the spot of all the teams on this list. Like it may not, I don't know, like Drake May is right now just a wonderful idea. And we put a lot of hope and a lot of expectations on him. But that is the one spot on this list where somebody could enter that equation and all of a sudden they're seeing 160 targets, 170 targets. Like that is I don't think there's another landing spot on this list where that is a possibility, or at least a strong possibility, but it could definitely happen in New England.
No, it's a great point. And I think Drake May is a little bit more than just like a nice idea. I think there's a proof of concept that he can be, like a quality starting quarterback. And from his skill set perspective, he can be a hell of a lot more than a quality starting quarterback. So I think that actually, like that vacuum of targets there and just the open opportunity and the fact that Drake May, I think is really good. I think puts them in tier 1. I actually think the Packers are more of a tier 2 team just because it's like a specific thing that they need, right? And I think that Devontae Adams and maybe DK Metcalf are like the only guys that fill that category, But like if they just add and I actually like the idea of them adding Stephon Diggs. because I think he gives them a man coverage beating ability. And, he at least, like, he's a veteran that can get involved in kind of teaching some of these guys, like, the finer points of the game. But, like, if they added Stephon Diggs, that's different, right? Like, I think that's a good addition, but it's not like, rocket that guy up to, a damn third-round fantasy pick, whereas I think Devontae Adams could be a third-round fantasy pick, hypothetically, if he lands in Green Bay, right? So it's like a specific thing. And then certainly if they get into the draft, even if they take a round one guy where they're picking, I don't think that player immediately becomes like a number one receiver.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And you're probably right. I've talked myself into this idea that they should go after, or they will go after DK or Devontae, and so I maybe I'm assuming too much, right? If it's a lesser name, then I'm a lot less interested. And in the if I going back to the running backs, generic running back who lands in Denver, I'm going to be pretty interested in. I will not go so far as to say that generic receiver who lands in Green Bay I'm interested in. It's going to depend a lot on the name.
Right, especially because it's what's going to happen is they're going to talk about Adams, they're going to talk about DK Metcalf, or at least the fans will, and then they're going to take another like big-bodied guy with traits in the third round. Like that's what they always do, And I that's not a bad move by Green Bay. I just think that like I'm not willing to totally give up on guys like Reed or Wicks, and like Dobbs is fine. So I think they're a team that if it's the right guy, get that player. If they can get DK Metcalf for a third round and they send Dobbs back or Wicks back or something, like I think that's a great move for them. It makes a lot of sense. But I think if they don't do that, it's not like oh my God, they're screwed now, especially if they can develop these guys and like get better. So I think they're a tier 2 team. I think the Chargers are a tier 1 team, man. I'm with you on that. Like that wide receiver 2 spot is really enticing. Also, because I think it could be, if it's the right guy, like if it's Devontae Adams, I mean, which number one, it should be Devontae Adams. That would be just a home run addition by them. They're ready to compete right now. They have a veteran quarterback. I know Devontae Adams like seemingly only wants to play with Derek Carr and Aaron Rodgers. How about get ready to learn Justin Herbert is a better player than both of those two right now. So I love that landing spot for him. And even like that would be a 1A, 1B situation. I hate that, but like I hate saying that, but that would be a 1A, 1B situation with him and McConkey. So, and even
especially after these last few years, let's just get Devontae Adams in a situation with a great quarterback, just surrounded by grown-ups in an offense we feel pretty good about. And there's no distractions, there's no sideshows. And he's just focused on football. I mean, I agree with you. That's like a 1A.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Focus on football. Like we're ready to win. We're actually competing. I like that a lot for Devontae. Again, it might not happen, whatever, but it's the right spot. They have the cap room to do it. But shoot, even if they added like an Amari Cooper, I think that would be. I'm not itching to draft Amari Cooper or something like that, but I think it would be the right type of move where I would be interested. And I'd also throw out too, like the Texans wide receiver 2 is really appealing as well. I think they're a tier 1 candidate because CJ Stroud is good. I'm interested in what Nick Caley is going to bring to the table here. Like they could add an Elijah Moore or something, and I'd be like, oh man, like let's go. I'm interested to see what that looks like.
That's almost just a receiving core with Elijah Moore and Nico Collins at the top is really just pandering to Matt Harmon. That's not even. I mean, dude,
they had Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs last year. Let's keep the pandering going.
Yeah, it may happen. That was one of my just thinking
What's
about.
Tyler Lockett? I mean, Tyler Lockett's available. Add him to the mix too.
Tyler Lockett is available. Yeah, just thinking about spots where if Chris Godwin isn't back with the Bucs, I'd really like him with the Texans. And there's a huge opportunity here, obviously, right? Because Tank Dell is going to be coming off multiple surgeries, almost certainly not going to play in 2025. Diggs is available, so there's a lot of targets available here. And if we could slot a Chris Godwin in there, I feel awesome about it. But it is still a ripe opportunity. So I agree. I don't know if it's tier 1, but it's no lower than tier 2.
Okay. Let's talk Cowboys wide receiver 2 and Rams wide receiver 2, because they're, I think, similar situations. Proven veteran quarterback, big target vacuum after a clear and obvious alpha wide receiver.
Yeah, I like this a lot. The Cowboy spot is sneaky because remember, it was just a couple of years ago that back half of the season, Brandon Cooks in like 2023 was a top 20 fantasy receiver, and he was scoring touchdowns every week. So like that's out there. That's available. And then last year, you know, it was just this revolving door of dudes named Jalen who were scoring touchdowns for the Cowboys occasionally, and would deliver a handful of highlights. But like, you know, they just didn't have one guy who was coming through the way Cooks had the prior year. So this is a pretty huge opportunity as well. If we get a full healthy season from Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb as CeeDee Lamb, man, there's a lot of open space in which to operate for a clear wide receiver too. And you have this, you know, in the free agent class now, we've got, again, it's Keenan Allen, it's Christian Kirk, it's Hollywood Brown. There's a long list of pretty interesting names who would look really, really good as the Cowboys' number 2 receiver.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it needs to be Keenan Allen, but I mean, there's a lot of interesting names there for sure. And like, yeah, I think Dallas wide receiver 2 and Rams wide receiver 2 should probably be in tier 2 along with Green Bay. I think tier 1 is New England, it's Chargers, and then it's Texans. I think tier 2 is probably those 3. I would say we need to do 4 tiers for the pass catchers just because there's so many here. And I would say tier 3 is probably like, this is probably Steelers wide receiver 2 zone. And I would say that like the nebulous Chiefs TBD receiver and Bills TBD receiver should also be here because those are very volatile based on like the other players on the roster. Again, if Pickens gets moved, which by the way, I think he can get moved to Kansas City, that just, I'm going to keep kind of wish casting that just because I think it's so perfect. They need an X. He can beat press. He's a headache, but Andy Reid is no stranger to taking on headaches.
Yeah.
So I think like there, again, a lot of like that could rocket up the list. I think the right receiver in Kansas City could rocket up the list. The right receiver in Buffalo could rocket up the list. But again, I'm not right now. They're a little bit less like clear cut than the other tier 1 and tier 2 options we have.
I agree. I think every remaining team and every remaining situation here, if it's the right guy, it's really exciting. And if they solve the quarterback position the right way, it could be really exciting. But there are multiple variables with each of these teams. I would also say, like, man, we flagged Denver pass catcher here, and if that's the right guy, super interesting. It may not be the right guy. Like I thought going into the offseason, for all the talk that we've heard from Sean Payton about, you know, got to find a joker. You know, it's easy to imagine, you know. How does he find like a Taysom Hill type? How does he find, you know, but when he talks about the joker position, whatever that means to him, he's thinking of Taysom Hill. He's also thinking of Reggie Bush. It could be any position. It could be a running back. It could be a receiver. Deebo Samuel seemed like a guy who would fit that perfectly, but obviously he lands in Washington. That's awesome. The one guy that I keep coming back to in this draft class is Tyler Warren as a possibility for Denver because they obviously have an opening at the tight end position. And man, Warren, I think, can do all that Taysom Hill better than Taysom Hill. I would be super interested in that. He, you know, caught triple-digit passes this past year. He's a reformed quarterback, right? He's a former quarterback. That's exciting. So he can throw it a little bit. He can run it a little bit. He had, 4 touchdowns as a rusher last year, 8 as a pass catcher. I think he would be really interested in Denver, but I'm not looking at Denver pass catcher on its own in the absence of a name as like a super exciting position.
So I could justify them as a tier 3 team if you want to put them there, only because like I think the world's a little bit their oyster. They could add a tight end and it would be that guy I think would become immediately fantasy relevant if it's a tight end. But they could also add like a certain type of receiver, although I do kind of think they might continue with hey, we have Cortland Sutton and everybody else kind of orbits around Cortland Sutton. I think they could kind of continue with that, and I would understand where they're going there. But yeah, I mean, I think that, again, because the world's their oyster, like if it's the right guy there, again, very similar to like Pittsburgh, Kansas City, Buffalo, if it's the right guy, they could really rocket up the list.
Yeah, I think they belong in that group. And that's exactly what we've done with tier 3 here, right? It's like if the quarterback's right and if the receiving name is right, then all of a sudden we're really interested.
So tier 4, that leaves us Cardinals wide receiver 2. That's just on my radar that I think they can add like the right type of veteran to, you know, move Marvin Harrison around a little bit. Maybe Michael Wilson's a good player, but probably more of a 3 than a true 2. And obviously Trey McBride is there, of course, but again, just the right veteran could really help unlock Marvin Harrison, I think. So that's more of like what it does to the rest of the team. Same with Carolina wide receiver, because I think they're a TBD pass catcher, because like they could add a tight end and, you know, maybe compete with Jatavian Sanders there. But they could also just roll with Jatavian Sanders. I think that would be fine. Tommy Tremble's a free agent. But like the right X receiver would be really interesting for them. And then the Jets, I think they're like kind of a blank slate, but of course we don't know what the quarterback situation is there. The offensive coordinator's new, that whole thing. So I think tier 4 is pretty settled. Like the right player would be really interesting there, but I think probably a little bit less of a fantasy needle mover than some of the other ones we outlined.
Yeah, Carolina's pretty interesting just because, man, Bryce Young played so well at the end of last season, and if that's the version of him that we get moving forward, that's a team that can all of a sudden support a couple of different viable fantasy starters in the receiving core. I don't know what the name is that lands in Arizona, but again, we've talked about this. We've talked about this full cast of characters that are really solid supporting receivers. Many of whom have already spent time in Arizona, right? Like Christian Kirk's already been there. Hollywood Brown's already been there, so they probably don't go back. I don't know. Maybe that's an interesting landing spot for Tyler Lockett. Not that it gives him fantasy relevance necessarily, but maybe that's the right type of player. But they already have two guys who are going to command triple-digit targets. So it's really difficult to see, that next Arizona receiver as somebody who's going to be a fantasy starter for us.
Yeah, I'd also throw Baltimore maybe into this group just because
Sure.
I don't think their wide receiver 3 is a fantasy needle mover, but I just see so many. The Ravens they've hit on like 2 young guys in Flowers and Bateman. I think that's a good enough wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, even if Flowers is not a traditional wide receiver 1 for what they do. I think that room is good enough, but they need depth beyond those guys. They obviously tried the Deontay Johnson thing last year, which went up about as worse as it possibly could. I could see them adding like a Keenan Allen though. They haven't done hey, we got to get a boring veteran on his last legs and get some utility out of him in a while. And I feel like that would be kind of interesting there.
That would actually be kind of interesting, man. I like you just threw out Deontay Johnson's name, and I'd completely forgotten about him, which is kind of what he did to himself, obviously in the back half of 2024. But man, I liked that guy not so long ago. That's crazy.
Yeah, you and a lot of other people. I like Deontay Johnson too, but I'm like. I don't even think I'm going to chart him for like this free agency drop I've got coming up on reception perception. I'm like, dude, he might be like and nobody's going to sign him. So I'm not going to waste my time until that. Like if somebody signs him, I'll go back in and check it out. Like what happened last year, mostly from the Panthers days, because that's really the only place where he played a lot. But other than that, like I've got to suffer through like Hopkins and Cooper and some of these guys. Like I'm not gonna burn hours on Deontay Johnson just yet. But that is my cross to bear. Nobody else's. All right, I think that was pretty good. Like we've got a good sense of the landing spots that are pretty open here from a fantasy perspective. Andy, appreciate you doing this, buddy. What do you got working on right now beyond just like being tortured by fantasy baseball?
Oh man, they got me hammering away deep in the baseball content mines. So that's where you'll find me mostly. But we actually just wrote the newsletter, the fantasy football newsletter for this week, and it took a similar approach to what we just did, where we looked at some available spots around the league and like just dream fits for those spots. So it was Devontae to the Chargers, right? It was, because I was writing it was Ashton Genty to the Bears. It was not Najee Harris to the Cowboys. I had not had that epiphany.
Can you go back and amend that? I don't really know how newsletters work, but can you like send an addendum?
I can retract it. I don't think I can pull it back. Maybe I'll try to catch it before it goes.
Well, I mean, shoot, if it's already out, you could maybe just send like a new one tomorrow and like just make it about that. I would say just make like the full breakdown on
emergency newsletter,
why Najee Harris to the Dallas Cowboys makes perfect sense, and just include that screenshot that you took of the chat during the break of what Colin said to us. It might end up in us all being fired, but whatever.
What a way to go out.
What a way to go out, Andy. Like, they talk about, Brandon Graham, right? Just he tore his triceps again after winning the Super Bowl, like goes out at the top. That would be you. That would basically be like equivalent to you've had one hell of a run. You're like a Yahoo legend, a true icon, not just to this company, but in the entire fantasy industry. You've stuck around for a really, really, really long time, just like Brandon Graham stuck around for a really, really long time. And that's basically you going out winning the Super Bowl right there.
Perfect exit. Yep. Couldn't write it better.
I love it. Okay, well, we'll see if Andy does that. My guess is probably not. My guess is Andy is going to be back on this podcast next week talking free agents with me, which is exciting, but not quite as exciting as that potential newsletter. But at least we put it out there on the internet. That is going to do it for today's show. But fear not. On Monday, we are back. Mock Draft Monday continues to roll on. We have Underdog's Hayden Winks joining the show to share his 5 favorite fits from his most recent mock draft. He also shares some spicy takes, perhaps on quarterbacks, for this episode's Stand on the Table. Until then, we're out.